Carbohydrates do not cause insulin resistance or diabetes, and that is actually the general consensus of, say, the American Diabetic Association. That's a consensus of most medical doctors, endocrinologists, and people who work with diabetics and work with insulin resistance, that carbohydrate intake itself is not actually a factor. And it's not saying certain types of carbohydrates do not affect this, because obviously they can. But generally speaking, insulin resistance is caused, one of the biggest causes, of course, any massive calorie surplus that causes you to gain body fat, particularly anything that's biased towards gaining liver fat, organ fat, things like that. Okay, so herein lay the problem with any sort of idea that carbohydrates cause this. Societies that eat extremely high carbohydrate, meaning 70% or more of their calories from carbs, actually have very low rates of diabetes. They tend to have low rates of insulin resistance. When you look at it in the metabolic ward, most carbohydrates, particularly say starchy-based carbs, they don't cause insulin resistance. Okay? And we need to be clear on that point. And particularly if they're more whole foods, right? So you take the white rice and stuff out, which still is actually pretty good there, and you look at slightly higher fiber carbohydrates, and then that would include even non-starchy stuff like fruits. They're not associated with insulin resistance. People who eat these as primary foods don't develop type 2 diabetes at an appreciable rate. They don't develop insulin resistance. So the question becomes, which foods are associated with it? Saturated fat, it's the top of the list, right? And people can argue about that all they want. They can say, well, I don't, how come people who do a keto diet, sometimes it reverses slightly? Well, because they lose body fat. Ketogenic diets make you lose weight because they reduce appetite, they reduce calories, and therefore you lose body fat. But when you look at even the data on that, they don't have, and we need to be clear, that sort of diet has no additional benefits towards that beyond the fat loss. Okay? It looks like when you look at the data, very low carbohydrate diets, if they improve insulin resistance or improve type 2 diabetes, appears to be caused 100% through the fat loss. That is the only mechanism by which they benefit it. And that's what the experts are saying. And I'm not saying it doesn't work, because it will. If you're quite obese and you lose 30 or 40 pounds or 50 pounds on that sort of diet, of course your insulin sensitivity is going to improve. And of course your type 2 diabetes is going to improve. It will improve the same amount it would on any diet that made you lose that through your calorie deficit. Okay? But we need to be clear, that's the extent of it. And again, not saying that doesn't work, because someone will come in and say, but I did that and it did work and it helped. Well, of course, because you lost body fat. And I would say, congratulations, well done. No one's discounting that. But when it comes to the actual causes, the data is very clear. When we study direct impacts on insulin resistance, liver fat, things like that, saturated fat's the top of the list. Okay, saturated fat. And I'm not saying all saturated fats are exactly the same. There is some variation there. But generally, that category causes the most. All right, what happens behind it? Fructose that reaches the liver. Okay, and that usually comes in the form of refined sugars in excess. So again, we need to be clear, this is where we see insulin resistance occur in the lab, in the metabolic ward, in humans. Like, these are the foods that induce it. But we do need to be clear that the saturated fat, when it's been looked at in those studies, calorie for calorie, still beats the refined fructose for that. And that doesn't mean that that's an endorsement telling you to eat a bunch of table sugar. Okay? Because that's still not great. It's certainly not good. It's not good for you. And it will still create those problems. It's just that it's not as pronounced as the other. It's slightly less bad. In regards to that, But in general, the data is extremely clear. And again, the medical experts largely agree on this. So when someone says, yeah, but this one doctor says different. Yeah, but if you find one doctor who says something and you have 1,000 who are successfully treating patients and looking at the studies who are disagreeing with them, and they're saying, look, this is what the science shows, this is what my expertise shows curing people, that other person is a fringe expert. Keep that in mind. That actually doesn't bode well for them, because there can always be disagreements medically. There's always disagreements among researchers, of course, right? Anything that you put out, even a scientific consensus, there's going to be some experts who disagree. Okay, that's normal. It's very, very rare to see anything different, to where 100% of all medical doctors or scientists agree on a point, right? So there's always some dissension. But the other thing to also think about with some of those dissenting, there's also a tendency among those who are saying different to sell books and to make money off that, because they also know that there's an audience for that, right? And for the people who come in and disagree, well, no, you are the audience for that. Okay, your existence actually makes it marketable and profitable for them to do that. So just keep that in mind. Okay, and again, I'm not saying we shouldn't have alternative viewpoints and that things shouldn't be questioned, and researchers and doctors shouldn't try other methods, because of course they should. But you have to be aware of what has been found to be the case and generally accepted and what seems to work. And again, high carbohydrate diets themselves are not linked at all with insulin resistance. They're not linked at all with diabetes. It's highly refined diets, usually high in fat, because what you also see, even if table sugar and stuff is too high, and it does create issues, you still don't see a lot of diabetes or insulin resistance to that, to that extent among people who are eating low-fat diets or diets with almost no saturated fat, irrespective of the quality of carbohydrate they're consuming. Okay, so that has to be factored in. Again, not endorsing that, not telling people, and again, you'll see medical doctors will tell you the same thing, who make those statements. They're like, look, I'm not telling you to go drink a bunch of soda. What I'm telling you is that carbohydrates themselves are not linked to it, and that if you're eating a lower fat diet, very high in carbohydrate, and it's more whole food carbohydrates, you're probably not going to have these problems at all. Okay, it's just not seen in the case studies. It's not seen in the research. It's not seen in the epidemiology. Right? Carbohydrates themselves are not the cause of diabetes. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.